Welcome back to Missing. I am Tim here today with Lance. Lance, how are you today?
I'm doing fantastic today, Tim. Again, music to my ears. Welcome back to Missing. It's been a while, and there's another bit of information that the audience should know is that while we have been inconsistent, pretty much non-existent in our releases of the episodes, it changes a little bit today, but for a good reason.
That's right. We're back today. We will be back regularly very soon. And I know we haven't been producing content for this channel for the past few months. And there's a lot of reasons why, but we're not going to get into that today. There will come a time and a place where we'll talk about that, but that's not today. Today, we are speaking with John Lordan of Lordan Arts and Brain Scratch. And he contacted us recently about a case that he was working on. It's the disappearance of Cassandra Durham from Roscommon, Michigan. She was 19 years old at the time of her disappearance in August of 1987, 5'5", 110 pounds, brown hair, and blue eyes. And John contacted us because he was working on it and really wanted to spread the word more about her disappearance. And so we thought it was a great opportunity to have him back on and to release an episode.
And John really gets into the deep minutia on this, and he covers it on his show on YouTube. He has 2 episodes on Brain Scratch, and this not only is a great episode to learn about the disappearance of Cassandra Durham, and if there's anything that anyone knows, please, all of the information is in the show notes, and we mention it in the show, but it's also a really good example. I didn't expect this to happen, which shame on me, because anytime you have John Lordan on the show, you will learn something and you'll have these mini revelations. This turned into an episode on how to manage law enforcement and family and the investigation when you're a content creator. He put out 1 episode, and based on that episode, he got more information, and he went back and he corrected things, and he elaborated on things, and he worked closer with the father and with law enforcement, and just a really good example on like step 1, step 2, all the way up to like, okay, I'm ready to release. So we just love that when someone can come on and just talk about the right way to go about creating this content. And honestly, like, it was nice to hear from him. You and I, like you said, we haven't been producing and we haven't been on the podcast airwaves in a while. To have him reach out, even, despite that, and say, I feel like it's important for every content creator I know to get the word out, it was kind of humbling and really cool to know that community, that good community still exists.
Absolutely. And if you have any information on the disappearance of Cassandra Durham, please contact the Michigan State Police at 989-422-5103. And Detective Sergeant Brett Nichols is in charge of the case. There's also an email address. We'll put that in the show notes if you've got any information.
And John Lordan's episodes are on his YouTube channel at Lordan Arts. You can go to his website, lordanarts.com. He's got a ton of other stories that he has as well. So once you get through Cassandra's story, you can choose from a number of the other ones, and he has the same quality coverage on each one of those.
All right, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Please follow us on social media at MissingCSM. And hey, give us a 5-star review while you're at it. Hopefully you're excited that we're back. We're going to be back soon regularly.
I'm excited that we're back.
Me too. It does feel good. Thanks a lot for listening, everybody. We really appreciate it, and we miss you. I hope you missed us. We'll be back soon.
And you know what else I've missed? I've missed our sponsors. So you're going to hear one right now, and after that, we'll be right back with John Lordan.
Welcome back to the podcast. John Lordan, how are you today?
Doing good. Always happy to be back with Tim and Lance. How are you guys doing? By the way, are we on Missing? Are we on Crawl Space? Where are we?
We're on Missing today.
Excellent. Excellent.
Yes.
I think that's the perfect place for this topic.
Sure is.
Music to my ears to hear welcome back to the show, John Lordan. And may I start with a compliment?
No.
You may. We'll allow it.
The compliment is for John. You brought this story to us and you said, I really want to get some extra eyes and ears on this and really shine a brighter spotlight on this particular story. And we're one of like, I don't know how many shows you're reaching out to do this. So I just need to commend you on putting your money where your mouth is, like backing up what you do. You had sent us the interviews or the episodes that you did on this. And at the tail end of the second one, you're speaking with this young woman's father, and you tell him this. You say, I'm going to do as much as I can. I'm going to reach out to my peers and my friends in the industry, and we're going to do like a full court press, trying to get as much attention on this as possible. And you could just hear it in his voice that he was just so astounded that someone would come along and do this. So I just wanted to give you a lot of props on backing up what you backing up what you preach, backing up what you do and what you say.
Well, I appreciate that, Lance. And honestly, my first thought was to reach out to you guys because of that panel discussion that we had back in, I think it was 2019 at the ASOC conference. And it was such a focus of so many of the panels that were talking at that conference about how do we get law enforcement engaging social media? How can we have a mechanism that helps in some way? And honestly, it's been something that I've been trying to figure out for most of my YouTube career. Just like, how do we let them know, hey, we're here to help you guys. We can cooperate with you in a meaningful way that might get your phone to ring, might bring that answer for a family. And it's been tough. It's been really challenging. I don't know. There's kind of these little pockets of success that we have around it where it's like, oh, okay, it's a particular case. And this case has some of those markers, right? Like a cold case, something that's quite a bit older, something where there's not a huge, like there's no, well, there is a big crime aspect, but that's past the statute of limitations. There's no indications that, Cassandra Durham has been murdered or something like that. So the information containment around this type of case should be handled differently. And thankfully, because of the man that we have on the picture that you can see of the Michigan State Police District number 7 right here, that guy in the center that's not dressed like the beat cop, the one that's dressed like a detective, that's Detective Nichols, Brett Nichols. Because of him, we kind of had a rare opportunity with this case. And I just wanted to be sure to circle it back to you guys, also because of your location and where this takes place. But for us to kind of pick up on that conversation. And have you guys had much success after 2019, after we had that discussion and tried to, like, have you found law enforcement to be very engaging with your coverage?
I mean, we had direct success with the Saratoga Springs Police Department welcoming us into their department to look into Sheila Shepard's unsolved murder. And that was a direct correlation to that panel discussion. Like, they went there looking for a way to raise the profile of this unsolved murder, and if they had gone, they wouldn't have reached out to a podcast and said, do whatever you guys need to do to come into our turf, come onto our territory, and kind of use us as tools to get this out there in a new way. So it was super effective.
But beyond that, it's challenging, I have to say. Like to what you said, few and far between, I would say. Detectives like that, or investigators like Callahan and Wilson of Saratoga Springs, and Brett Nichols as well. Big shout out to law enforcement who choose to work with folks like us, because we're always here and want to help.
Yeah, and that's why I think I'm trying to take the football and run it a little farther on this case. I want to demonstrate that we can be helpful, we can work together, and hopefully do something good for them. So that's really why we're here talking about Cassandra Durham today.
Absolutely. Okay, so can you give us a little bit of background on Cassandra Durham?
Yeah, absolutely. Someone on Web Sleuths actually had dug up this picture of Cassandra. This is from her school yearbook. We can see she went to Henry Clay High School in Lexington, Kentucky, and she was a senior in 1985. So she was born in 1967. She was also born in Kentucky. And I didn't ask her father, but I did detect a Southern drawl that he had when I spoke to him as well. But at the time she goes missing, they would be living in Baltimore, Maryland. So at some point, the family had kind of moved states. Two younger brothers, Jamie and Jason. And probably the most interesting thing that I learned about her from her father was this component to her personality where she seemed to be representing herself as two very different people. In her high school years in particular, she started kind of getting into this habit of dating two guys at the same time. One of them would be kind of the type of boyfriend that you could bring home to your parents, and then the other would be the kid that maybe spent some time hanging out at the park, smoking some weed and stuff like that. Just kind of a light side and a dark side almost to her. And he even described that her clothing would literally change. Like she would be wearing, the black leather jacket if she was going out with that guy, or if she was going to a family dinner, then she'd be wearing pastels or things that were just more appropriate for that type of event. So pretty interesting dynamic going on with her. She does wind up going to I believe it's Morehouse off the top of my head, university, but only for about a semester.
Morehead State, was it?
Yeah. I think you're right on that. Thank you.
Could I ask a quick question about her having these seemingly dual personalities, or I don't want to say personalities in the clinical term. She didn't have, she was not schizophrenic in any way, or I'm not suggesting that, but are those red flags that someone would at that age be attracted to this and that, and those two things are opposite?
I personally would be cautious of dynamics like that, just because, especially if one of these is kind of the God, I don't want to say like bad guy, but one of these guys is the going on to college. He's getting a degree. The other guy is finding work where he can, and, might be involved in drugs. The thing I get concerned about is just in any possible case like this, where you have two people that she might have been dating, domestic violence. I just get concerned that one is going to find out. And who says that it's the guy in the cardigan might be the one that actually commits the domestic violence? Who knows? But just in terms of that dynamic, it is something I asked her father about, just like, did her brothers ever talk to her about this? Because, brothers can sometimes be protective of their sisters, and both her brothers are younger. One of them was quite a bit younger. He was only about 10 at the age that she went missing, and she went missing at 19. She was just 2 months away from turning 20. And he didn't think so. He didn't think that they really had an opportunity for that. And even as a father, Michael was aware that she would smoke weed every now and then. She might have drank a little bit, but this was 1987, and she was about to turn 20. And, she was living in an apartment. It was actually Michael's apartment, but she was living in an apartment on her own while he was kind of starting his life with his girlfriend at that time, who would become his wife and is still his wife too today. So yeah, but to answer your question, Lance, I think it's a risky proposition right from the start. And I'm curious, because I do think that a lot of us go into our dating lives and kind of maybe aim in one direction, and then sometimes we roll out of that relationship and we say, you know what, I'm going to try something different, and I'm just going to swing the complete other direction. So it is interesting to me that her chosen dynamic seemingly was to, be dating both of those types of guys at the same time. But, she's also young and figuring it out at this point. So we do have a couple of pictures I could bring up. So yeah, here's kind of, what you might expect her to be looking like at a family event or something like that. Here's another one. I think she's actually even got like a Mickey Mouse shirt here and some blue jeans, just all fairly normal. And then, we get here's the black leather jacket version. And, almost to the point, like just a very, very different look. I was almost wondering if this was like a Halloween costume or something at some point, but after hearing her father's description, like this is I believe this is just one of the outfits that she would wear going out.
Feels very Madonna to me.
Yeah, a little bit,
bit.
definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, she doesn't look as dark as he sounded on in the description of her, but I see the point with the leather jacket and different makeup and things like that. But I don't know, that strikes me as more normal than anything else. Like, I think everyone
it does.
Everyone like has college aspirations and also went to the park, you know.
Yeah. Well, and I think her father goes through, he's contacted by the college, and they're asking where she's been. She's skipping classes. Basically, she's hanging out at the pool hall all the time. And I just, she's 19. Like, for me, thinking back to when I was going through that age, and you try all kinds of different things in terms of your lifestyle. And honestly, I tried getting married at 19. So it goes both directions. And you might, people might look at that and be like, oh, what a great idea. No, not really. That was a 5-year marriage. And then coming out of that, then all of a sudden I opened up and I was like, hey, you know what? Maybe I want to hang out in bars a little more. Maybe I'm going to stay out till 2:00 in the morning on a Tuesday night. Like, then I kind of hit my experimentation phase. I don't think we get away from that. I think it comes for us all at some point. And really, it just seemed like Cassie at this time was kind of in that. She had a particular boyfriend who her father talked about, Eric. Now, in most of the press on this case, he hasn't been named. The Detroit Free Press did release his last name, and Detective Nichols did an interview with a local station that was put on the internet. So his last name is now known. It's Boykema, Eric Boykema, that she was seeing at that time. And, the father's impression of Eric was he was kind of that bad boy side that she was dating. And but outside of that, he didn't have a whole lot to say about him. Like, he'd have him over for dinner. Guy was kind of quiet, kept to himself.
But not as great of an influence on Cassandra as some other people.
Definitely. To the point where her father thinks that he's responsible for a very big decision that Cassie made at some point. Before we get to that, though, I kind of want to roll back the story to her disappearance. So she disappears in August of 1987, and the world basically doesn't know about it. Her family knows she's missing. Her father reaches out and talks to a couple of detectives, but they're like, she's old enough. She could go missing if she wants. They kind of look into things a little bit, but no one's really helpful at that point. But there is no official missing persons report that happens at that time. It wouldn't be until 2019 when an investigator reaches out to him and says, or actually, I believe it was a family friend that heard about a body that was found, and they didn't know the identity of the person. And that family friend knew that Cassie had been missing for this whole period of time, and reached out to her father, Michael, and said, you know what, Michael, this could be her. You might want to try to find out. So he went to law enforcement at that point and told them about what was going on. And they said, well, in order for us to investigate that, we really should open up a missing persons file on this. And that's why they did that at that point in 2019. So, we're talking 32 years after the fact. And I think that's also why I'm partly motivated to try to help Detective Nichols with this as well, because law enforcement is way, way behind. They're playing an insane game of catch up, trying to figure out what's going on with this case. Something happens in early July of 2024 where, for some reason, it's like a misunderstanding, but almost a happy accident. The press hears that Cassandra Durham's case is being reopened or reinvestigated. And all of a sudden, there's a new little run of articles on this. This is from 9 and 10 News. Cassandra Durham and her boyfriend left Maryland in 1987 to visit the Roscommon area. They were believed to be driving a 1980 Honda Civic station wagon. And Roscommon is actually in Michigan. Troopers said they drove through Ohio on the way, and they stopped at Cedar Point. The Honda allegedly broke down somewhere around Detroit, and the boyfriend bought a new car, an Oldsmobile Cutlass. The boyfriend claimed they both returned to Maryland, but Cassandra's father said she never made it home. To provide or request additional information, please contact Detective Sergeant Brett Nichols. And basically, you have maybe up to 20 different publications, and this is all the information that's coming out. But because of this phrasing, to request additional information, I decided to reach out to Detective Sergeant Nichols and ask him for more information. And that kind of started a little dialogue about, oh, what are you going to do with it? And I'm like, I do this YouTube stuff. I've got a whole bunch of friends that are in podcasting. We could try to help raise exposure. We're just looking for more detail. I was trying to get a response from him before I released my first episode. It didn't quite work out, and I just went ahead with the information that I had. And literally, it wasn't much more than this. But, when you hear these details, I know a lot of us are thinking Gabby Petito, right? Like, this sounds like the Gabby Petito story, and it's got to be one of those situations. And, oh, it's interesting. They're not naming the boyfriend. Oh, only his first name has been released. If you look at the NamUs profile, it says that she has a tattoo of his initials. What are the initials? Just EB. So we at least know, the initial for his last name. It also says she has a tattoo on her other leg of initials for her sorority, which her father doesn't know because he's like, she was in school for one semester. I'm not aware of any sorority she was a part of. And, as I started looking into it, it was like a light bulb went off and was like, oh, wait, well, if it was for a sorority, it's probably not initials. It's probably like Greek letters. And maybe that's why we don't have a solid description on it. But so there's this kind of mystery tattoo. But outside of that, that was literally all that we had on this case. So I put out the video, and Detective Nichols watched it. And I started getting more messages from him over that weekend. And he was saying, you know what, we're working with our intel analysts and we're going to release some more information to you. And I was like, just send me whatever you can when you can. And by the way, if you could put me in touch with her family, here's my contact info. I would like to be able to talk to them as well. And, when I do this kind of coverage on cases, I will typically look for family members and social media contacts. And in particular cases, sometimes I will reach out to them and just kind of say, hey, this is who I am. I'm trying to be helpful here. Is there anything you want me to add to this? I couldn't find any social media contacts. So I had to dig into different records and then kind of started putting together, birth records and stuff like that. And like, okay, I think she's got two brothers. I think her father and her mother are still alive. But thankfully, the detective did reach out to her father, told him about my work, and the father said, yeah, put him in contact with me.
And I just want to pause real quick here as a indicator of the responsible way to go about doing something like this. And if anybody out there is thinking about podcasting or YouTubing in the true crime genre, you just gave like a minute-long gold nugget on how to approach law enforcement and family. And you went to the law enforcement first. The information you put out first was the information that you only had access to at the time that was already out there. And I'm assuming you sent Detective Sergeant Nichols the link to the episode so he would watch it. And
Yep.
he watches it.
Yep.
Probably watched it because he was like, this guy had the respect to send me what he made, and I just didn't find it on my own, which would have been super irritating. So it was almost like you were saying to him, I put this out here, I need the feedback now. And he gives you the feedback, and then he gives you that entry point to the family. And I think like anyone who's thinking about doing something like that, the importance of what you just said in that minute is huge.
Yeah. And there, to be totally fair, there's cases where you can't always get in touch with the family. Like some of them are just too old, too cold. Like this was one of those where, there was I couldn't find any endpoint to contacting the family directly. But also, to Detective Nichols' credit, it's that phrasing that he had put out through the media about, hey, for more information, contact me. And it's his phone number, it's his email address. And when I did contact him, even before the first episode came out, we were already talking. Like he already knew the episode was going to happen. I sent him a list of questions in particular. I was like, I'd love to get answers to these before I record this, but I'm recording it on Thursday, one way or another. And, if you can help, that's great. But yeah, to your point, there is, I try to be super, super cautious because yes, I want to motivate people that are listening to these shows to be helpful, to kind of dig into things on their own too. But there is a line in terms of like, look, I could have found the father's phone number. I could have reached out to people that I thought were the brother, could have done a bunch of phone calls. I could have tried to be wannabe PI and act like I'm someone else or something. Like, it's in some way, I see that as disrespectful, and it could be inflammatory as well. Like, they could get really upset with that type of approach. So I just don't do things like that. And, there's cases where sometimes the family members are suspects and you can't really have that contact with them and kind of get some form of approval before you go ahead and do your coverage on it. But this was just one of those stories where, with the details that we had, there was so little. And even with these little details, like, could she have come home and then a family member harmed her in some way? Yeah, absolutely. Like, there's nothing for detail here. I mean, you probably don't feel like that's the case when you know about this is a father that eventually reached out for help in 2019. But maybe that's why he took so long. Everyone's always wondered about that aspect when you have a missing persons report come in so late. So yeah, there's a lot. And thank you for pointing that out, Lance. It did occur to me when I was kind of thinking about things that we should talk about here today, is just taking a respectful approach on these cases and looking to foster relationships. Like, I got lucky enough to strike up with Detective Nichols here. That's why we're able to go into much more detail than we just learned about on this case.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program. Is Cassandra officially missing from Michigan, from Maryland, or is there some other area that she's officially missing from?
Yeah, they're treating it. I mean, it's basically, you've got departments in I think at least 3 states that are coordinating in some way on this. We've got Michigan that's kind of leading it, because that's where she was last known to be. She made a phone call from that Roscommon area and actually spoke to her father. But there are detectives in Maryland that have been helping with this case as well. And I believe, I want to say I'm not sure if it's Ohio or Pennsylvania. It might be Ohio, because they know that she stopped in Ohio. They know that she was at Cedar Point. But Pennsylvania is also another interesting state here because of part of the story that we'll get to as we go through Detective Nichols' notes here. But let me go ahead and start running that down. So basically, after that weekend of back and forth, he gets together with his analysts and he sends me not only this write-up that I'm about to share with you guys, but a few letters that Cassie had sent. So we're literally going to hear her own words. And as soon as I saw this information, I was like, I mean, I literally have to do another episode as soon as possible, because these details are so different from the initial assumption on that kind of simple version of the story that you guys just heard about. So here's what he wrote. Good morning, John. I'm going to give you a pretty full rundown of what we have so far. When this was reported to the Michigan State Police in 2019, it was the first time it was ever reported to law enforcement. Mr. Durham was compelled to report when he was contacted by a friend from Michigan who knew Cassie was missing. This friend told Mr. Durham there was a news story about an unidentified woman's remains matching Cassie's description, located in Michigan. Mr. Durham decided then to report Cassie missing in the chance that the found woman was her. This was investigated, and it was not Cassie. 19-year-old Cassandra Durham was last seen by her father in late July, likely the weekend of July 18th, 1987, when she stopped by his house to visit briefly with family before leaving to go back to work at the TCBY in Baltimore, for which she was a manager. Just to add a little something there, her father also told me that she was managing 2 TCBY locations. That weekend, her father left with family to go on a weekend trip. That Monday, while there, Cassie's father got a call telling him that there was a problem with the weekend deposits at Cassie's workplace, and they could not locate or contact Cassie. So remember, this is before cell phones. Essentially, someone contacted, I believe, her father owns some stores as well, and someone contacted one of those businesses that knew Cassie was a relation there. And that employee knew the phone number of where Michael was vacationing and called and let him know. So we've got this little game of telephone in terms of this information that's actually getting back to the father.
And what is TCBY?
It's a yogurt shop. Yeah, it's a chain of yogurt shops. So, and what's interesting about that she was managing 2 locations is basically the proceeds for both of those locations over a weekend has now gone missing. And now we're figuring out Cassie has gone missing as well. Cassie's father tried to call Cassie but got no answer. He and his family immediately left where they were. They drove to Cassie's apartment and found that it was empty except for some boxes, personal papers, and a note. And we do actually have a copy of that note, thanks to the detective. Dear Dad, please will you ever forgive me? I'm in trouble and I don't know when I'll be back. I will call and write. God knows I love you. Love, Cass. She also adds under that, I paid the gas bill and here's the money for the phone bill when it comes. I should be back by the time the next bills get here. If not, I'll send the money. Thanks.
Did she leave money with that note?
Apparently so. Apparently she did leave money with that note. The amount of money that was taken from the TCBYs that was supposed to be deposited essentially into the bank, the proceeds for that weekend for those 2 stores, her father seems to recall was somewhere in excess of $10,000. So a lot of money that disappeared there.
And it's a really sad note. I mean, you can tell that this young woman is in some sort of trouble, whether it's trouble she's brought on or trouble that's come to her without her expecting it.
Her father believes that Eric was some influence in this decision, specifically because Cassie had access to her father's businesses. And he was like, on the weekend that I was gone, we had way more money than that in my businesses. And she didn't go and take that. And if she would have gone and taken that, I would have never reported it because it's my daughter. So she actually made a decision that she was more criminally responsible for in some way. And her father really believes that that's because of some influence that Eric had, which, I just wonder about, because I know parents sometimes will look at the company that their children keep and kind of blame them sometimes for certain behaviors. But to his point, I mean, if she could have accessed more money with less trouble, what made that decision? Like, why did she go that way with it?
Yeah, it's a great point, because if she had access to more money with less trouble, Eric's not in the picture, right? So she didn't need the money. I mean, the answer is obvious. The difference is the reason why she did this particular theft, I guess. Was there a handwriting analysis done on this letter?
Not that I know of. I kind of just eyeballed, because we actually have several examples of her writing on this, and they're all consistent. Like they're definitely consistent across each other. The other thing I was curious about, and I actually asked the detective about this as well, I was like, okay, so this story actually starts with her stealing a large amount of money, and $10,000 is still a large amount of money, but in '87, like we're talking, with inflation and stuff, I mean, that's a pretty big chunk. Is the statute of limitations expired for any charges related to that? Could this still be a factor in her not coming back to her family? And he assures me, no, statute of limitations absolutely expired. No criminal charges related to this theft could be applied at all. And I went further and kind of researched for Maryland, because he was like, I'm not in Maryland, but I'm certain, I'm telling you, it's statute of limitations is expired. He's absolutely right. It's basically 3 years in Maryland for something like this. And for most things, like for drug charges, even charges of violence, 3 years seems to be, the kind of standard for statute of limitations there. So yeah, but could this still be a factor in keeping her away? Yes. Or could a component that helped motivate this still be a factor? Possibly. And we're going to see, as we kind of go through some more of these letters, there's almost some dialogue where it sounds like there's another piece of information that the family might know about that we don't, but I don't want to jump ahead. So later, over the next couple of weeks, other family did hear from Cassie by phone a couple times, but they didn't see her. On or about July 22nd, 1987, a family relation, and it's obvious to me it's Cassie's mother, because he actually gave me this letter as well, received a FedEx overnight package from Cassie that contained some money. A letter was also included in the package. So This is the letter from that. It says, "Dear Mom, this is all I have left. If you all can pay it, I swear to God I'll pay you back as soon as I can. Plus, I'll owe you my life, which I already do. Mom, I can't come home yet. Probably not for a while. I definitely have to straighten my head out. I'll be home as soon as I can. I just need some time. Love you, Cassie." She sent back, she says it's all that she had left. It's somewhere around $2,000. Her father couldn't remember. It was either $1,800 or $2,800, but pretty substantial amount of money that gets sent back to her mother around this. Here we're starting to get some indication that there's something going on with her, though. Like she has to straighten her head out as well.
Yeah, she also seems regretful. I would say she wouldn't have sent any money back also if she wasn't regretful, but it's also in the words there. So it seems like she's fixing to make plans to come back, I will say.
Yeah, and even like some people might look at this letter and say, oh, well, she's asking for someone else to kind of clean up the mess. But yeah, I mean, she's participating in it. She's sending back what she can and saying, hey, if you can fix this for me, please do, and I'll pay you guys back. But that seems to be a separate issue from this, I'm still going to be away. There's something I'm dealing with. I've got to straighten my head out.
What do you make of that, just based on like all of the information that has happened to this point?
Yeah, I mean, before I actually spoke to her father, I was wondering if there was some substance abuse issue of some kind that was coming into play or something along those lines. I know some commenters on the video that I put out were thinking maybe there's a pregnancy. Maybe that's part of why she needed to grab a bunch of money and she's running off with her boyfriend. They're going to go start a new life together somewhere. There was also this really weird detail in the limited information that came out previously, and I don't really have clarification on this. There's certain things that Detective Nichols is still having trouble with clarifying, including some of the cars that we're going to talk about here. But there's this weird little detail that Eric came back to Maryland, but it might have been in 1988 or 1989. So there's this kind of looseness in terms of when he even decides to come back. But if you're talking about a couple that was taking a summer trip in 1987 and he's not coming back for a year or two after that, I don't know. That's a pretty interesting wrinkle.
And when was this letter?
This one would have been, I believe this one is just several months after. Her father, it's unfortunately her mother's not doing well at this time. I think she might be getting close to the end. So I could only speak to her father. Her father said that he was only contacted by phone once, and that was a few weeks after she had disappeared. That was from Roscommon, and he actually had caller ID, so he noted the area code. And I did some research on my video, and I completely forgot about that, the possibility of splitting area codes. I thought that the area code he gave me, I'm like, that's not Roscommon, so there must have been some mix-up, or maybe they were lying to him about where they were. I forgot about the area code split. Thankfully, some of my viewers told me about that. So but he was able to recognize where the call came from and that it was Roscommon. And then a year later, he would get another phone call, which I'll tell you about as we go through the detective's notes here. He gets the first phone call on or about September 1st, 1987. And it's from a 517 area code. Cassie told her father that she was in Roscommon, Michigan with her boyfriend, Eric, visiting Eric's grandparents. Cassie apologized to her father, told him not to try to find her and not to be mad at Eric. And there's another interesting detail in what she tells him in that phone call. She even says, don't come and try to find us. We both have AIDS. And her father kind of chalks that up as she is really just laying out whatever stories to try to stop us from coming out and getting her and bringing her home or something like that. She's literally throwing anything against the wall that she thinks can stick to keep us away, essentially, at that point. He doesn't believe that it's true. So he did try to call that number back because he had that caller ID. He never got an answer. And that's the last time that he spoke with Cassie. And then he did get another letter from her around this time. And this is the last of the letters we have, but it's quite a bit longer. And again, it's kind of still leaning into that same point about her struggling with something else here. Dear Dad, I don't know what to say or where to begin. First of all, I'm sorry I haven't called. I can't. I'm afraid to, and I don't really know what to say. I don't really have an explanation for what I did. I just did it. Sure, there are a few non-substantial reasons, but clearly none worthy of doing such a thing. The way I see it, it's too late now. I can't turn myself in. I just can't. If I get caught, I'll have to face up to it. If I had the money, I'd give it back, but I don't, so that's that. Mom said if I come home that she'd pay it, but I can't come home even if this gets cleared up, at least not yet. Of course, I'll be home when things are cleared and I get myself straightened out. Mom thinks I'm crazy and have totally gone over the deep end, but I can promise you I haven't. I just made a bad decision, and now I've got to face up to that error. Dad, I'm sorry, I swear to God, and I hope I haven't embarrassed you and Jerry. I would die if I thought I had. I love you, Dad. Don't ever forget it, ever. Someday, I don't know when, this will all be over and seem like a bad dream. Dad, there's one thing I ask. Please, I'm begging you. Don't say anything about Eric. He's my only chance. And if it gets mentioned, I will never come home. I love him. I love you and Jerry, and you two better make it. Do it for me, please, Cassie. Don't try to find me, please. It will only make things worse. I'll call you very soon. I'm doing fine. Okay.
Stuff about Eric there kind of stands out in the rest of this letter. I love him. Just, that's one sentence. You would think her parents probably already knew that, or at least knew that she wanted to stay with him. That part kind of strikes me like he was over her shoulder, but obviously I have no way to know. But it does kind of seem a little out of the blue about Eric.
Yeah, I got hung up on the phrasing of it, like if it gets mentioned. And I kind of brought that up with my audience, and that's when, some of them responded with, maybe she was pregnant, maybe there was something, but it seems to be like it's something that she's assuming her father knows about. When I asked him about it, and I gave him an out on it too. I was like, you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, by the way, but do you know what she's talking about with it? He really didn't have a clear idea of what that was.
It seems like in the beginning of the note, she's definitely talking about stealing the money. So I don't know if that's the same thing here at the end when she's saying it.
Her communication with her family, as we can see in these letters, is somewhat caring, and seems to be like, maybe back to the earlier points about her having these two separate sides to her personality. Maybe this is the side that she needs to present to them to, fulfill whatever obligations she internally feels like she has with her family. And maybe there's a very different story on the other side of that. Now, Eric, when he is interviewed, does share with the investigators that Cassie's using cocaine and she's burning through a bunch of money, and that she had been using cocaine for a while. Now, her father, was in regular contact with her up until her disappearance. And she had even worked in his stores up until only 4 or 5 months before her disappearance. And it's assumed, it was told from Eric that, she had been using cocaine through that period. Her father's like, I think it's pretty easy to detect if someone's using cocaine. He's like, I wasn't picking anything up from her from that type of use. Yes, I knew that she was smoking some weed. Yes, she was probably drinking a little bit here and there. That's all that I could detect. I did not detect any cocaine use. But if, now we've kind of been through 3 letters, she's clearly talking about that there's something at her that she needs to straighten out. And that seems, especially on this last letter, because it's so long, I think we can kind of get a better sense of how she's compartmentalizing her issues a little bit. Her getting straightened out is kind of one part of the letter. Her loving Eric is this other part of the letter. I don't think those are the same thing. I don't think that she's like, oh, I'm in a bad relationship and I can't come home until I get this straightened out. That doesn't quite feel right, because she's being clear here. I love him. He's my only chance. But then to that comment, your only chance at what? He's your only chance at sobriety. He's your only chance at a happy life. Like there's all kinds of different ways to look at that.
Can you go back to the first page on that? I just wanted to point out some of the phrasing there. It's very articulate. And we're speculating on whether or not this is somebody who is going through some sort of drug withdrawal or was addicted to cocaine and so addicted to cocaine that she stole $10,000 and which is wild that you'd be that addicted to something where you'd steal from your father's, your father is going to know it's a franchise thing. And there were no indications that she was addicted to cocaine leading up to that. You get what I'm saying there? Like that, those two don't kind of weigh out to me, but there's phrasing here that is so interesting to me and so not scatterbrained. It doesn't feel like someone who's scatterbrained writing this. Sure, there are a few non-substantial reasons. Just that phrasing is so impressive to me. And but clearly none worthy of doing such a thing. That whole sentence is structured so well. It doesn't give me the sense that somebody is like flying through this letter and desperate. Did you get the sense that she's desperate?
And why send it?
And why send it?
Yeah, what's the motivation for sending it? She's not asking for anything. She's asking
for some patience. She's asking to be like, don't come looking for me. I got to work some stuff out. And it's all very well articulated.
Yeah.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors. And now we're back to the program.
So we think, this is the last kind of definite confirmed contact between her and her father. But there is one other phone call that happens. It is within the next few years. Mr. Durham came home to find a message on his answering machine. Someone had put the phone next to a record player, and he heard the first few lines of Separate Lives, a Phil Collins song. He had caller ID, and he saw that the call came from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Believing that it may have come from Cassie, he called that number, and it was a phone for a pizza parlor. So he decides he's going to drive up. Harrisburg isn't that far. He drives up to Harrisburg to visit that pizza parlor, but he doesn't locate Cassie. Now, he actually kind of doubled that trip up. He had two places he wanted to check on. He had some friends that also were able to dig up an address for Eric. And so he goes to the pizza parlor. They have, I believe it's a phone that they just let customers use. It's not even really a pay phone. And essentially, that's the phone that this call was placed from. Employees don't know what he's talking about, don't recognize her, nothing along those lines. But while he's out there, he decides he's going to go check this address for Eric. And the way he describes it to me, he says, the address might have been 2401 or something on that street. And he's driving down the street and it ends at 2000. Like the address is just bunk. He doesn't find the location. Interestingly, I did find some locations, and I'm 99% sure that Eric was actually living in this particular town in the 1990s for a substantial time. So he was there. The question about the phone call, was it her or not, is really a tough one because, we have cases nowadays where people are wondering if it's AI that's calling 911 or, is it a text message sent by someone else? This is almost kind of close to that because it could have been a phone call that was placed by someone else to make it seem like it was a message from Cassie. But, it's kind of a question.
So was the song from the jukebox or something?
I don't know if it was. I would imagine so. Because I don't know what else you would. I know it's a song from a movie unless like the movie was on, but I don't think they would be running that movie on TV at that point. I think that song was still relatively, early 90s, maybe. I guess it could have been.
Yeah, good question about the jukebox, because that's what I was wondering as well, because it might just have been on and no one answered and she just hung up and it wasn't exactly a message to her father.
Yeah. And if you look at the lyrics, like it's not a strong match for the situation outside of, the chorus kind of, we go on living separate lives. Like it's really about a man and a woman. It's about a relationship that has ended and like they're in contact and, how do you speak to me so kind? And like all the lyrics are they're very clearly about a romantic relationship. But if someone was just trying to get the chorus across to her father, it's possible. So we do have several cars that wind up becoming part of this story. I just kind of wanted to pull these in real quick. Cassie actually had a Honda Accord like this. It was also green as well. Now, supposedly that's the one that broke down. And at some point they buy a Cutlass. Details on this Cutlass are loose. It's either late 60s or possibly 70s. We've got no color on it. And that's one of the first questions I had put to the detective, like, hey, are you guys trying to trace records on this? So let's just kind of keep that in mind as we roll forward here. Cassie's boyfriend, Eric, was located. He cooperated in an interview. He stated that he and Cassie did leave Baltimore to take a road trip to Michigan to visit his grandparents. He stated that he had a grandmother in the Detroit, Michigan area, and his grandfather lived in Roscommon. They left Baltimore in Cassie's green 1980 Honda Civic station wagon. On their way to Michigan, they stopped at Cedar Point. Somewhere in or around Detroit, the Honda broke down. They got rid of it, and Eric purchased an older model, late 60s, early 70s Cutlass, in which they continued the trip. Eric relayed that they did make the visits as planned, and then they both returned to Baltimore together. He told interviewers that he and Cassie lived together on and off at his apartment after they returned. After a couple of weeks, they had a final argument, and Cassie drove off in a tan Ford Escort that Eric believed Cassie was borrowing from someone. So this is the first time we hear about a third vehicle being involved in this story.
Sorry if I missed it. What happened with the green Civic? Was that the one that broke down and they dumped it in Detroit? Yeah. Okay.
And what, they went to like a dealership and bought a new car?
That's part of the trick that we're having here is he basically tells me that, because I'm asking him specifically, like, are you able to trace the registrations on this? Like, this guy's, he's dropping this car, he's picking up another one. Like, there's got to be some transfer of record, transfer of title. They are not able to basically find these records at this time. So I don't know if that's just an artifact from this case being from the 1980s and those records aren't kept that well, but I can't imagine. I mean, we're talking, DMV records, like these should be somewhere. But they're having trouble putting that together. Now, the tan Ford Escort, this is literally like, we only know about this from his story. He's saying he thought it was a car she was borrowing from someone. Like, could this part of the story be made up potentially? Yes. But quite honestly, so can the Cutlass. Cassie's father thought that there might have been something to, they go out there in her car breaks down, or they decide to get rid of it and trade it. And then using this money that she also stole, they buy a new Cutlass, and essentially that is bought for Eric. That's at least Cassie's father's interpretation of what could have happened around here. So,
and then he says that she left in this car, this tan Ford Escort or Taurus?
Escort. I believe it's Escort. Yeah, as an Escort.
Which, by the way, I just Googled most popular vehicle, 1987, 1988. And it's a Ford Escort. Yeah.
Yeah, these things were everywhere.
With the retail value at $6,632.
Nice.
Right. Interesting. So she supposedly, per Eric, returned to Baltimore but didn't see her family.
Yeah, which is also kind of interesting to me.
Because she sent letters.
We have the letters. We have that phone call that happened from Pennsylvania. I have addresses for him living in Pennsylvania. Like, I'm not sure. I'm not sure about this whole coming back to Baltimore aspect.
Yeah. Sounds like a reach a little bit. But I guess it depends what condition she felt she was in. I agree with you guys. I think there might have been some drug interaction. I don't know if cocaine is the right drug that fits all those, variables. Yeah. But maybe that was it. Her physical condition. She didn't want to see her folks. But I don't know. I'm not sure if I believe that part.
Yeah, what I don't like about this part is also this story that they had a final argument and then Cassie drives off in a tan Ford Escort. Like, we look into so many cases of missing women in particular, and it's like, oh, they had a big argument and then she went missing. Like, it's just such a troubling component. And we know in some of those cases, it comes back to being a domestic violence or an intimate partner violence issue. So that makes me nervous in terms of just the story that's being told here.
I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around even the stealing of the money for drugs, because that means that she went from purchasing drugs as a recreational type thing to this accelerated criminal act of stealing $10,000. Was there any in between? Were there any moments where like the till at the end of the night was a little short? And, was she taking a little bit here and there? And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, I'm going to take it all. Doesn't it feel like a huge jump from like, oh yeah, she kind of smoked pot to stealing 10 grand for coke?
Right. No, the only other possibility I could think of around that is if she had kind of racked up a debt, if she was using regularly and just digging a really deep hole in terms of how much she owed some dealer. And then at some point was like, okay, how am I going to take care of this? Or things got to the point where it was escalating with a dealer and they were starting to threaten violence or, harming her family or something along those lines. And she was like, okay, I don't know how else to do this, which that type of situation might explain the whole, she didn't take it from her family, she took it from someone else. Like if there was some aspect, and even her letters, like, do you get the sense that this is someone that might be protecting their family in some way? I do. Like, she's trying to distance herself, but then keep in contact with them for a period of time and be very loving in that type of contact that she's having with them and apologetic. So, something along those lines, I think might have been it. It seems like things from her perspective got to a point where they were out of control. And what's sad about that is I'm very confident after spending just the limited amount of time that I did with her father that, if she went to him and just came out up front with whatever she was dealing with, I'm pretty sure that's a man that would have helped her.
Do you think they may have committed any other crimes or robberies on the road? Could that have something to do with this?
I mean, I think the content creator in me wants to keep framing this as like, it's a Bonnie and Clyde, but we don't know where Bonnie is.
Right. Yeah.
But I don't think so. I don't get that sense. And quite honestly, I've looked into Eric. Eric's criminal history is not very deep at all. And it's pretty petty. It's not, there's no violence charges. It's really, the information I'm finding, he's not a very good candidate for being a suspect in this case. And specifically, Detective Nichols was interviewed by News Nation last week also. He pointed out that Eric's not considered a suspect. He's a witness. He also specifically wrote in the response to me, right now there are no suspects as we have no evidence that there was any foul play, and Cassie's ex-boyfriend has been cooperative thus far. So, really not a lot of strong information that I'm finding that makes him seem suspicious. I believe he's been in a long-term relationship for a while. Based on what I'm finding, it looks like they're happy. Like I'm just not finding things where I'm like, oh, this is the big gotcha. And honestly, I wouldn't have even looked as deep as I did, except that when I spoke to Michael, he was saying that one of the things that would drive him crazy is thinking of the possibility of trying to find where Eric lived and then just waiting outside and seeing if a woman would come out of Eric's house and if that was possibly his daughter, because he would still recognize her to this day if it was. And that just kind of made me curious about like, oh, well, I wonder if he is with anyone. Let me go looking at that. And it did send me down a little bit of a 5-minute like, oh, wait, could Michael be right? Could that actually be? But I don't believe so.
You probably brought this up when you were going over the letters, and you definitely brought it up in the episodes on YouTube on your show. But there's something that Cassie is mentioning in these letters that indicate that she and her mom had conversations about something. She's referencing moments that are very clearly like read between the lines moments. Like,
yeah.
Like what is there any more information on that? What's your opinion? And
there isn't, but my opinion is you're absolutely right. In the letter, the third letter in particular, she's saying that, hey, mom says I'm being crazy. I should just come back, but I can't. So there is clearly some form of two-way communication that's happening between her and her mother at that time period, where the contact with her father has gone down to, she's going to write him a multi-page letter, and that's about it. But in that letter, you're right, she's referencing that there's definitely more communication with the family.
And the parents weren't together at the time, because she's mentioning this other woman, Jerry. What was the relationship like, though, between her parents? Would it be a relationship where if the mother received a phone call, she's going to talk to the father, or a letter and show him the letter?
Yeah, I got the feeling, and I didn't particularly ask him about this, there was actually another relationship even in between that. So I didn't get the feeling that there was a lot of love lost in terms of him going through a separation with her mother. And then he got into another relationship very quickly, and and got married, and that marriage was very short. And then he was dating this new girl when she went missing. So the only thing that's even a hint that there was some decent communication between them is that he knew the amount of money that was sent back that came with that letter to the mom. But like, that's it. Like, he wasn't able to share a whole lot of information from her perspective. I hope someone kind of captured it. I hope, maybe if the younger brothers had spoken, one of the younger brothers did wind up hiring a PI for a while. So maybe that PI, might have taken some notes on what the mother's thoughts or interactions were at that point. But yeah, I don't have those details.
And what about like a psychologist? Taking those letters to a psychologist, someone who can look at the way it's written, analyze the writing style of it. Again, I just keep going back to that. It doesn't strike me as somebody who is strung out. It doesn't strike me as somebody who is going through like a rushed moment and needs to get this information out quickly. Just going back to that Jerry individual, the father's girlfriend or fiance, she even comments there at the end of that other letter that she, I want this to work out with the two of you, or what does she say in that comment?
Yeah, she says, work this out and do it for me.
Yeah. Like, you guys can do this. Do it for me. Like, that's not indicative of somebody who, again, is on a cocaine bender. I don't think so. I'm not an expert of that. But anyway, my question is there an opportunity for somebody who can maybe analyze this on a more clinical level?
I think you putting that question in this episode is the best way for us to pass that along to the detective and make it a consideration for him. Because of course I'm going to send him links to, all the media that's following on this case.
We'll just tell him to fast forward to an hour and
I will. I'll say just listen to Lance only.
Yeah.
You've heard me talk about this enough. Yeah. Just listen to Lance and Tim.
Now, what about like other vehicles on her driver's report? I would think the detectives searched for all that, so they would probably know if she had other vehicles and to what point she stopped having vehicles, or right?
Yeah, there is nothing for additional records that has been shared with me, and outside of that, I know that private investigator did look into like her social security number, and there was no usage on that at all. So it's weird because in one way I'm hopeful that because of the conditions with how she left, that there was essentially a crime that she committed and she went off on her own accord. Like we know all that. She's communicating with family in a way where it's not super easy to trace her. I'm hopeful that there's some possibility that she has just started a new identity and she's living somewhere under that new identity. And I just hope that she hears the message soon enough so that she can kind of get back in contact while her mom's still alive, while her dad's still alive, while, her brothers are still there to, share some time with her. That's what I'm hopeful for. I'm worried that the way that the story was originally put out that made it sound like that kind of Gabby Petito situation, I'm worried that it was phrased that way because it's a hunch of the investigation in some way. That, maybe Eric is more part of this story than we think. And that's why I'm also nervous about comments like, oh yeah, we had a big final fight. And then, oh, she drove off in some tan Ford Escort that I think she borrowed from someone. Like that story just sounds weak-ish.
Yeah. Well, it's impossible to prove, right? Like, we've heard stories like that where it's like, oh, we got no fight and I dropped her off at the bus station and then she's gone, and
right.
Like, that one in that specific case, very likely that was a lie. So I'm sorry to Eric if he's not lying, but we can't prove it.
Yeah, that's something I'm trying to be cautious of too. And kind of back to that earlier conversation we were having about appropriate contact and stuff like that. Again, I could not find any way to directly send him some kind of message where I'm like, okay, I know 100% this is the guy, and I just want to give him an opportunity to share anything that might be helpful here. Because we don't know, we don't have any reason to think that he's done anything wrong here. The detective's being very clear. We don't have any reason to think that he's done anything wrong. The only method I could find for that would be reaching out to a woman that I believe he is currently married to or might have been formerly married to. And like, what a terrible thing. Could you imagine someone sending a message?
Oh my God.
Yeah, I'm trying to reach your husband because, we want to ask him about a missing persons case. And, there's some pretense that maybe he had done something wrong around this time. So I don't have any mechanism for it, but I'll just say it on here in case Eric is listening. Eric, if there is any information you'd like to share with us, you could reach me at john@lordanarts.com. If you want to come on and be interviewed, whatever, we're up to help in any way on this case. And I would think that it would only help your interest too, especially now that, your name's kind of been released in all this. So.
Yeah, right. Even if there's no answers, even if he can't provide answers and says literally the same thing, it gives everybody an opportunity to hear the voice, and it just furthers the investigation. It furthers the interest in this. And towards the end of your episode with her father, I think he said something to the effect of like, I know I'm not going to live. Like, I know my lifetime is limited. And you've been saying that her mom's not doing well. So,
yeah.
I mean, if there's something that he has that he just doesn't realize he has, and it takes coming on and having total strangers talk to him and try to get that piece out, he might not even know that he's got a really significant piece of this.
Yeah. Now, we do actually have some more details from him that I haven't shared with you yet. And that is just... So he says that, that fight happened. She drives off in the tan Escort. He says that's the last time that he saw her, but not the last time that he was in contact with her. Shortly after he moved to Pennsylvania, while there, a few months later, he said he received a call from Cassie. She was just checking in, and their conversation was just general about life and how things were going. Eric said Cassie got his phone number from a friend called Stoney. We were not able to determine Stoney's real name to contact him and confirm this. This call from Cassie was the last time Eric heard from her. So it is an interesting story because it's like, oh, no, she called me and I talked to her after that. Oh, really? How'd she have your phone number? Because you moved to a different state. Oh, well, she got it from Stoney.
And who's he giving this information to? Is this to
the investigators? Yeah.
Okay. So I have to imagine the next question on that is, like you said, what's Stoney's real name? Is that Stoney's real name? No? Okay.
Right.
And then with the Ford Escort, the next question has to be, who did she borrow it from? And then he would have to say, I don't know. And then they would have to say, how would you not know someone who she's close enough to and comfortable enough with to ask for the keys to their car? And did that person never say my car was stolen?
Right.
I mean, the whole line of questioning after that has to exist, right?
Oh, I would love to see the questioning on that. But let's not forget about that character trait that her father shared with us. Could this car have been someone else that she was dating? Like, could this have belonged to someone else? And then she just drives off in it and goes with that person and she's off onto the next part of her life. It is possible. So, it's hard when you're looking at this stuff and, we're being given very specific pieces of information. I mean, like I said, he had his intel analyst and him had to go through this and decide what parts of this are we actually going to get out there. But yeah, to your point, I would love to see that whole interview. And also just nowadays, thankfully we have a lot of that footage that becomes public and you could watch some of these interrogations for yourself and then let your little internal lie detector, which I try to always keep turned off for myself the best I can, but it's hard. Sometimes you watch someone and you're like, that guy's just lying. I'd love to see some or even hear tape on that interview, but I don't know when the most recent time that they would have spoken to Eric is. I would assume if this didn't become a missing persons investigation until 2019, I would assume that Detective Nichols has spoken to him at some point within the past 5 years. But
But yeah, before that, he may not have even known she was missing, right?
Right.
Yeah.
There was nothing officially reported, and I can't imagine that investigators, outside of knowing that she was with him, if they were trying to prosecute the robbery, maybe they would have reached out to him if they found out, especially if they found out he was back in town. Like if he did come back to Maryland within 3 years, some possibility that an investigator would have reached out to him to ask about Cassie in relation to the robbery. But I'm not getting the gist that that's what's happened here. I don't know for sure though. So yeah, on those vehicles, he says we're continuing to try and dig up records on the 2 vehicles involved, but given the time frame, we have not located any yet. The same goes with finding information on the Roscommon phone number. We'll continue to work on this, which is interesting because the Roscommon phone number should have just been his grandfather's phone number. I'm not sure why they're having trouble tracking that down, but of course we're talking about trying to trace a phone call that happened back in 1987.
What about his parents?
I don't know if Michael had actually captured the full phone number. I mean, I know at some point he called it back. I know that he recalls the start of it. I didn't ask him if he had written that down, but even if they had the phone number, there seems to be, based on what the detective's saying here, there's some problem that they're having in terms of tracing that phone.
Oh no, I mean, what about Eric's parents? Has anyone talked to his parents about anything?
I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure. That's a good question.
So because he was never declared missing, right?
No. Yeah. So Detective Nichols also had a little more information here. He said, we're also aware that there are several coincidences, holes, connections, and information that continue to be investigated. There are also additional people we're seeking out to speak with here in Michigan. And the Maryland State Police are also assisting with interviews and investigation needed there. The challenge we face is the time frame. The purpose of this reaching out to the media is to seek the help of our greatest resource, the public. We hope to spark someone's memory, compel someone to come forward with information, and help us reunite Cassie with her family. Someone out there knows where Cassie is or carries information that can help further us in this investigation, and we hope they come forward. So, and again, just so it's stated, the statute of limitations expired on those criminal charges. Just in case Cassie's out there listening, just want you to know, you can just come back. All that stuff off the boards. And of course, if anyone has information on this, you can contact Detective Brett Nichols yourself, and I highly recommend you do. He's been a great person to work with, and I think you won't be let down by him and his amazing work ethic on this. He's with the Michigan State Police Violent Crimes Unit. His number is 989-422-5103. You can also email him at Nichols, NICHOLS, B2, at michigan.gov. And if you need to remain anonymous for some reason, he can also take care of you on that front too.
And one more quick question. Is her or her family's DNA in any database?
Yes. Yeah. Family DNA has been captured. They did have, in the radio interview he spoke about a particular story, and I don't know if it's the same unidentified body story as what started this whole thing in 2019, but there was an identified body she could have potentially been a match for, and they did use family's DNA to test against that and rule her out.
Well, John Lordan, thank you so much for joining us here today and telling us about Cassandra Durham's disappearance. It's very peculiar and certainly mysterious. Hope she is out there somewhere, as you said earlier. No proof of foul play or any crime beyond the robbery back in the 80s. But gosh, where is she?
Yep. We're looking for help on all fronts, and that's part of why we're trying to hit the East Coast. But to be honest, she could be anywhere. So if you could, anyone that's listening, if you've got some friends that you think might appreciate hearing this story, appreciate the conversation that we're having here, maybe have some interest in caring about a story of this nature and helping to reunite a family, please take a moment and send them this episode.